everyone, it's Lindey. Welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk to you about why I stopped selling clothing on eBay. This is a question that I have been getting a lot lately, and it's because a lot of my YouTube videos for the last couple of years have been primarily showcasing and selling clothing, as well as several videos stating how to sell clothing and even thrift with me vlogs where I show picking up clothing to resell on eBay. But over the last year, my content has taken a sharp left turn and I've started selling different kinds of merchandise, and that has led to a lot of questions of people that see some videos of me selling clothing from a couple of years ago and then videos of me now not selling clothing, and it's come up with, a lot of questions that I get asked. So I wanted to make a video kind of addressing that question and talking a little bit more in detail about the decision that I made, why I made it, and if I am enjoying what I'm doing now versus selling the clothing. But before I talk about that, I want to go back a little bit further, because a lot of people were under the assumption that I have always been a clothing seller, but that's not actually the case. Back 14 years ago, when I first started selling on eBay, I was selling clothing because that was the cheapest item that I was able to purchase and resell with the money that I had at the time. But when I actually started eBay again back in 2015 and decided to make it an actual legitimate business, I did not start back on eBay selling clothing. Back in 2015, I was looking to work for myself. I had just had a new baby. My husband was going to be leaving for overseas for work, and I needed something to occupy myself. And that's when I really decided that I wanted to take my eBay game to the next level. Prior to that, I was just a hobbyist seller. I would list a few items every single week here and there, but I had really decided that I wanted to use that opportunity to start a legitimate eBay store. I opened up a basic store. I started sourcing more, and I started documenting that journey in 2016 on YouTube. But what a lot of people don't know is way back in the beginning, when I first started my eBay store in 2015, I was selling no clothing at all whatsoever. I was mostly selling items that I purchased doing retail arbitrage, as well as items that I would buy locally off of Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist. I was selling lots of personal care products, I was selling a lot of retail items, and I was even selling things as radical as barbecue sauce and bubble gum. If you actually go back to way early on my YouTube channel, you'll see some videos where I talk about selling things like barbecue sauce and goldfish crackers and Dollar Tree breath mints. You'll see those videos from way far back. But what ended up happening was something that I did not suspect when I started my YouTube channel. Because about 80% of the items that I was selling were retail arbitrage, I did not realize that even being such a small YouTube channel, putting those items out there for the public would essentially tank my entire market so that I could no longer sell those items on eBay. It was then that I really started learning the dangers of putting your business on social media. I have since done a video talking about, don't share that much on social media. You'll end up shooting yourself in the foot, and I'll link that video up here in case you missed it. But what ended up happening was I started talking about the items that I was selling. I was telling you exactly where I was buying it. And because it was all retail arbitrage that wasn't necessarily clearance items, they were just everyday off-the-shelf items, a lot of people watching my videos started buying and selling those same items, and they started undercutting me. So I basically put myself out of business, and I could no longer sell those items on eBay because the markets were so flooded and the prices were tanking every time I checked. And it was only then that I decided to start selling clothing on eBay instead of the personal care and retail arbitrage items that I had been doing before that. And the reason why I automatically switched to doing clothing on eBay instead of liquidation was because at the time I didn't have the capital to start investing in liquidation. So I decided to start thrifting for clothing items because that was easier for me to do with the capital that I had to invest. And when you are sourcing thrifted items, it becomes a lot more difficult for someone to replicate exactly what you're doing, because when you're thrifting one-of-a-kind items, people can't just go out and sell identical items. Like if you're selling a certain flavor of bubblegum from Walmart, anybody with a Walmart can replicate that and start selling identical items. But if you're going to the thrift and selling something like used Levi's, people might not be able to find those exact Levi's at their thrift. They might be able to find different cuts or different washes, but finding those identical Levi's was very, very difficult. And because of my YouTube channel and my public presence and having so many people watching my eBay store, I needed to pivot the kind of merchandise that I was selling so it wasn't items that were so easily replicated. But unfortunately for me, there was only certain kinds of clothing at the thrifts where I live. I live in rural Kansas. Nobody here really dresses up. And so Miss Me jeans were pretty much the highest end merchandise and clothing that I was going to find. And when you're working with items that don't have a huge resale value as something like clothing that anybody and everybody can sell, it starts to very quickly oversaturate the market with those bread and butter items. And when a market becomes oversaturated, that's when prices start to lower. So for a couple of years, I was selling thrifted clothing, and my area of expertise was jeans, because around here, I really don't have very many thrifts to pick from, but the few thrift stores that I have plenty of jeans. And I personally liked photographing jeans and listing jeans. For me, it was very simple. It was easy to understand. It was easy to duplicate. So I was able to hire help to help me list. So for a couple of years, I was strictly selling jeans. That was my area of expertise. But over those 2 years of selling jeans, my lifestyle completely changed. My son was diagnosed autistic, and I started having to put a lot more time in for his care, because having a child with special needs meant that he needed more one-on-one time. He needed to be taken to multiple therapy appointments throughout the week, and I needed to adjust my schedule to fit his needs a little better. And if you're a clothing seller, you know that listing clothing on either eBay, Poshmark, pretty much any online platform is a very involved and detailed process. You have to make sure that the clothing items are clean. You have to make sure that they're pressed without wrinkles so that they photograph nicely. You need a nice big space with good lighting to photograph clothing items, and you need a space to do measurements, and the entire listing process is just really super involved and takes a lot of time. And I was very quickly starting to see my time available for listing shrink way down to a very minimal amount of time every single week. And even going at the absolute fastest that I could list jeans, I was still not able to get as many listed as I had wanted to in the time that I had to do it. Because what ended up happening was the market also started changing. And if you're a reseller, you've probably noticed how markets fluctuate. And one of the first things to change in the market is the price. The more similar items that are listed in a marketplace, the more price needs to be competitive in order to make sales. So for something like jeans, especially being the kind of brands that I was finding being so common, the more competition I was having, which means I was having to be super competitive on price. So even though my cost of goods remained the same, my price kept lowering, which meant that my profit margins were getting slimmer and slimmer. And when your profit margins become really slim, the only way to increase your revenue or increase your profits is to sell more of those items. But going back to what I was saying before, I was having less and less time to actually do these listings on eBay, so I couldn't increase my revenue or my profits because I couldn't list any more than I was already listing. So then I had decided to hire help, which worked for a little while, but that same problem kept being an issue. I had someone helping me create listings, so I was able to list more, which made my revenue go back up, But again, the market just kept getting more and more oversaturated with those same brands that I was selling. And so my prices kept going down, and it got to the point where it just really didn't feel worth the time. And when you're running your own business, you really start to have to evaluate your time. And if the work you're doing doesn't feel worth the time, it's up to you to pivot and find something else that works. So when I was realizing that I was putting in the same, if not more hours to make less money, it became very, very clear to me that I needed to pivot and change what I was doing. But lucky enough for me, by that time, I had finally started developing enough cash flow and capital to put back into my business that I was able to start making liquidation purchases. So essentially, selling jeans was a stepping stone to get me to the point where I could start buying and selling what I truly wanted to do, and that was health and beauty items. Because if you remember, back a few years ago, that's how I got started back on eBay. I was selling hair care and eye drops and antacid tablets. And then I was also selling things like the barbecue sauce and bubble gum, which I don't really do much now just because the same reasons why I had to stop back then. And selling these items is something that I truly enjoy. I did really love selling jeans. Don't get me wrong, I did love it. I loved how easy they were to store. I loved how easy they were to photograph. I loved how easy it was to use keywords to build listings. I think of all clothing items, jeans were by far the easiest item to sell. And that's why I think the market became so saturated, because so many people wear jeans and they are so easy to list. Out of all clothing, jeans are just not very complicated. And so that was kind of one of the reasons why I think the market became so saturated with the kind of brands that I was able to find. Now the question, do I still think that you can make legitimate money at home selling clothing on eBay or Poshmark? Absolutely. Just because it wasn't working for me and the allotted time that I had doesn't mean that nobody can do it. It just meant that the monetary goals that I had for myself and the amount of money I was bringing in from it just did not match up. I only spend about 20 hours a week doing reselling. And when you factor in the time to go find the jeans, that's not even something that I talked about. The time it takes to drive to a thrift store, pick the jeans, buy the jeans, bring them home, launder them, iron them if they need to. I know it sounds weird to iron, maybe steam, but you gotta get those wrinkles out. All of that was just really, really time consuming. And when I only have 20 hours a week to do reselling, when you factor all of that stuff in, that only left me a few hours for listing. And when you only have a few hours to do listing, you have to make sure that your profits are as big as they can be, because you can only do and sell so much. And the numbers just were not working out for me. Another reason why I decided to switch to liquidated health and beauty items as opposed to liquidated clothing items was also the ease of listing. Items that have a barcode are significantly faster to list because all you have to do is just put in that UPC number. All of the item specifics are usually automatically generated into your listing because they're all tied to the product categories within eBay. And they're also super fast to list. I mean, it is what it is. It doesn't have a lot of detail that needs to be photographed. It's usually just something like front and back of the item and the listing is done. Also, a lot of health and beauty items are very small to store, whereas clothing can take up more space, which means in the same inventory space that I have in my basement, I can actually list more merchandise than when I'm selling clothing. Not to mention the fact that I really am passionate about selling health and beauty products. I've never really been one of those girls that's super into fashion. I've just never been one of those girls, but I love selling pretty things. And to me, that could mean sweet smelling perfume. It could mean a gorgeous shade of lipstick. I just prefer that. It brings me a lot more joy, so I'm happier with my job. And you have to make sure that you're happy with your business. You want to enjoy what you're doing. You don't want to be resentful of the merchandise that you're selling because you don't like listing it. You want to make sure that you are buying and selling items that you somewhat enjoy, because if you don't buy and sell items that you enjoy, they're never going to end up getting listed. And if they don't get listed, they're not going to sell. Now, I suspect that part of the reason why I've been getting this question from a lot of people is because a lot of people are starting to feel the same way that I was feeling when I wasn't feeling like the time that I was putting in selling clothing was worth it. I was starting to want to branch off into different areas and find new things to sell. And if that's you, if you've been a clothing seller for a really long time, don't think that you have to stick with it. You know, it was about a year ago, I made the decision to completely scrap my entire eBay store and start over from scratch. And that's exactly what I did. At that time, I had about 800 clothing listings, and by the time the year 2019 rolled around, my listings had dropped to under 50. 800 to 50. And I did not run auctions to sell everything off. I just flat out ended the listings and pulled the items off my shelves. Which is another question that I've been getting, is when I stopped selling clothing, what did I do with all of my clothing items? So I have a consignment account open on swap.com. I've been a seller on the swap.com site for a couple of years now, and I've reached the level of being a seller on swap.com to where I can send in as much merchandise as I want to. So basically all I did was I got some boxes, folded up all of my inventory, and shipped it off to swap.com to have them sell it off for me. But I needed a clean break. I needed a clean break. I went through, I checked every single clothing item. I checked the little box of every single clothing item in my eBay store, and I clicked end, and that was it. I was starting over from scratch. And that's exactly what I did. In December of 2018, I started ordering my first liquidation orders, and I completely pivoted, did a 180, and started selling all new merchandise. And I have learned so much over the last year with selling liquidation. And I have to tell you, I am so glad that I made that change. And I'm glad that I made that change not because I hated selling clothing, but because I started selling the items that really did make me happier. It was finally being able to sell the items that I've always wanted to sell. I have finally reached that point where I'm able to do that, which makes me love my business even more. So I would encourage you, if you have been entertaining the idea of starting liquidation, or even just starting to sell other kinds of merchandise than you're doing now, if you're needing to shake things up and bring some change into your business, breathe some new life into it, I highly recommend that you at least dip your toe in the water, just a little bit, and give it a try. Because the whole point in us having our own businesses is to make ourselves happy. And if you're not happy selling what you're selling, it's okay to change it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video and videos like this, please give it a thumbs up. That way I know. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. Don't forget to check the video description. I will put some useful links in there. And do remember to subscribe if you would like to see more content. And I'll see you guys with my next video. Bye-bye.